Hello, welcome to the Marketing in Minutes podcast. My name is Colby Klushman and I am your host. I'm super excited to be here. We have a small group today. Usually it's just me and a guest. Sometimes it's just me, but today we have a few friendly faces. So first, we have Josh Sanders. Josh, you're a returning guest, so welcome back.
Thank you.
And then we have a new guest, Darren Howerton. Darren, welcome.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yes, before the call, I found out Darren is a longtime podcast listener, first time doer.
Podcast E?
So, one of those things. um, but just so you all know, and a little background, if you're listening, Darren is Evenbound's senior HubSpot administrator, and then Josh is one of Evenbound's senior technical program manager. And I'm your senior account manager. So just a bunch of seniors today, not in age, just in position title. All right, let's get started. I think we have a really fun conversation today, and it is WTH is an API integration. So essentially, what is an API integration? What's the deal with it? Why should we care? So let's just start with that. Can either of you or both of you explain what an API integration is and the basics of how it works?
Yeah, I'll kick it off, and Josh, you can add some color. But an API integration, API stands for Application Program Interface. It's a set of rules that allows two different pieces of software to communicate and interact with each other. They're usually pretty, in an ideal space, pretty well documented. We're a HubSpot partner. HubSpot has a really robust set of API documentation, but it allows you to connect two different pieces of software together using, that list of rules and protocols. You know, High level, that communication involves a couple different things. There's data synchronization, there's sort of streamlining of workflows, there's an extension of functionality. So a really popular use case is chat gpt. Right now it's an AI chatbot, but there's a set of apis that allow you to connect different applications to chat gpt and sort of extend chat gpt to connect to other applications. So like ChatSpot is a chatbot that is powered by ChatGPT that plugs into HubSpot, and it uses APIs to create that sort of connection between the two. And then you can customize and get pretty flexible with that system. There's a couple different methods that you can build APIs, but you know high level, it's a pretty low level of technical requirements in terms of like amount of code needed, that allows you to get two pieces of software to speak to each other. So that's my soapbox. What do you got, Josh?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I tend to come up with more folksy language for it. I call it tech diplomacy because you're trying to get two warring factions to sign an armistice through technology. But yeah, there's a lot of really good use cases. We use HubSpot primarily here, but Salesforce, sometimes people use Salesforce for one thing and HubSpot for another. So there's this like sort of kind of a, what do I want to say, like a two-headed monster where you're kind of getting like a native integration plus API because some of it won't integrate directly. There's some challenges that you can run into with like bilateral communication, and API can solve for those things. So I think a lot of people tend to look at API like, if there's not a native integration and I can't create something with like a third-party tool like Zapier, then API. But I honestly would advocate for looking at it as like a primary solution because there is like increased security. There's a lot more end-to-end encryption and things like that. I just think the functionality is way better if you have the time and funds to throw at it.
Yeah, that kind of leads me into what I was going to ask next. Like, it seems like, Darren, you said this could be a low level technical project, not too much coding, but it also, I feel like for some, depending on your experience, could take a while. And like you mentioned, Josh, could be a bigger investment. So, like, what do you see the real value being here, or like the advantages that people would say, yes, I want to spend this time and money to invest in an API?
That's a great point because native integrations tend to work the way they work, period, the end. They're not very editable. And I tried to say this word in the last one and I messed it up too. So maybe we should just scratch that from my vernacular altogether. Can't really tweak a native integration. However, with API, it can be pretty bespoke, which is kind of awesome. The other thing about API is that it kind of future proofs itself. So when there's like updates and things like that, it's automatically going to track those things rather than you having to keep an eye on it yourself.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The one you made is, and I would qualify what I said with it can be pretty simple. It still does require knowledge of code and some developer. So that is usually a more expensive resource, whether that's an internal or external resource. So you do want to think about what level of sophistication is required and consider, are there other solutions like Zapier or middleware or native integrations out there that fit your needs. But to like help answer when would you or why would you want to consider going this route? Like one would be oversight, um, and people who may be data or PPI like security conscious and don't want to rely upon a third party built integration or some integration that may or may not be supported in 1 year or 2 years, to kind of take that initial upfront, heavy lift, knowing that they'll have complete oversight over sort of their infrastructure. So I'd say that's kind of one reason to consider it. And then like flexibility and like what you can create is usually more, there are usually more nuanced things you can do with APIs that you can't typically do with like an out of box integration. So, one would be just use case. If you can't accomplish what you want to accomplish through other means, API would probably be something to consider. And then two, like if it's something where you've got some really crucial systems and this integration is an integral part of your business, that may be something you want to consider. And then I'd say the third piece too is like, is it something that could be maybe useful for your customer base? Like if you're building a bridge between two applications or softwares, like, well, it's obviously going to help your business, but maybe you're an agency, maybe those are two tools that your customers are using frequently. So that investment isn't just, reaping rewards internally, but as well for your sales and services teams to now have a new toolkit. So yeah, that's how I think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are great points, because, like I said, it could be an investment, but future proofing and if it's something you can use across multiple customers or clients, again, I think those are all reasons to invest in that. So I think we touched briefly on an example or two, but do you have any real world examples of how people have successfully utilized API integrations?
Um, yeah, I think, and this could fall on my sword if this is wrong, but I feel like I read somewhere that one of the first sort of like public uses of APIs was for eBay and PayPal to collect payments. So, I think that kind of is something that has been repeated many times over, like connecting a shopping cart to a website. And that leverages an API. But then, like, the other cool place that I think we start to see it now more is sort of this Internet of Things space where you have some sort of smart device in your home like an Amazon Alexa or the Apple Pod device, and that can connect to your Philips lights and your smart meat thermometer and your smoker, and those are all using APIs to communicate with each other. So yeah, millions of use cases. And I think the cool thing now, like some of the examples we talked about earlier were AI examples, but you know one of the big hurdles for getting started with APIs is you do need to be fluent in code and have some developing experience. But AI is now, able to spit out code and help generate things. So it's feasible in the very near future. Some, non-technical marketers, and I would like to qualify that I certainly have never set up an API integration. I kind of know what's feasible and isn't. But non-technical marketers or semi-technical, as I refer to myself, will be able to build, pretty decent integrators on their own with little to no code needed, just through APIs and chatbots. Very meta. So
Uh, I like um, I like the example of like rideshare. So when I was kind of between jobs years ago, I was doing Uber, and the functionality to be able to like when I first started, this is showing my age, but when I first started, you could only use Google Maps or Apple Maps. I can't remember, one of the two. But then they started to open it up, and you could select if you wanted to do Waze or if you wanted to do Apple Maps, which I don't know anybody would. I love Apple, but why would you want to use Apple Maps? But that functionality was not built in, and I thought it was cool that they allowed you to use like a third-party tool within the app, and that's API.
I just want to say every time we're on a podcast together, Josh, I learn more about your past and like all these jobs you've had, and I didn't know you were an Uber driver. So just add that to the list of expertise and things you've done, which is so funny.
Renaissance, I'm a Renaissance man.
um, yes, yes, you are. Um, Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask one more question. So, if a company, an agency, whatever it may be, is looking to integrate and start or implementing an API integration, do you have any best practices or like things you would warn them against or want them to keep in mind before moving forward with that project?
yeah, I would say like to add to that, a good partner or a good technical partner is going to be one that is able to communicate technical things like this to non-technical people. So you should be able to go into the project with a level of comfort and an idea of what that's going to look like. I would say typically working to scope out like a custom API integration has an initial phase that's known as like solution discovery. And that's where you do a lot of heavy documentation, data mapping, and scoping out the project to really figure out what it's going to take. So I would say just setting the expectation that it will probably take some form of investment, whether that's, actually a cash investment or just time and commitment, to figure out what it will take to build the integration that you're seeking out to build. And then the other thing like that is table stakes, right? You need to make sure there's API documentation available. Like, is it actually feasible to even go through solution design? And then like mapping out like what pieces of information do we want being communicated and in what direction? Is it from A to B, from B to A, bidirectional? And then that the last layer to that would be like timing. Is this something you're going to need to have happening like instantaneously, like as soon as somebody clicks book a ride, like we need to query the system and find an Uber driver, or is it, at the end of the day, I need to pass a list of marketing qualified leads from one system to another CRM for sales the next morning to have. And those couple questions are going to be like key ones to get answers to. And if you can reach out to a partner with some of those already answered, it's going to be, shorten that solution design process even further.
I think with anything, any kind of time and financial. I mean, most people who are doing this don't have just expendable income where they could throw tons of money at it. So, I think being strategic and spending a lot of time on the front end, kind of mapping out exactly what you want, and then maybe some wish list items that aren't necessarily integral to your like day to day business ops could be parking lotted and done later. So I think being realistic and doing your due diligence up front is super, super important. And then having a partner who's going to do a really good job, like Evenbound, for example. It's really important that you have someone you trust because you can't really verify that stuff. If you don't understand code, you're like, all right, it looks like a bunch of like numbers and dashes and stuff. But if you have a partner that you trust, then you're going to get like immediate results and ROI after it's built.
For sure. So, yeah, it sounds like you both are on the same page. There's a lot of work that goes into the beginning of this project. but hopefully you do that thoroughly and it'll pay off once the developer, the technical person actually starts coding this API for you. So I love that. I think those are great points. So that's all the time we have today. I hope if you're listening to this, you have a better understanding of API integrations and how they work. I certainly do as a slightly less than semi-technical marketer. So Josh and Darren, thank you so much for jumping on. If people wanted to connect with you on LinkedIn or reach out, would you be open for that?
Oh yeah, I would love that.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So I will link your LinkedIn profiles to the description of the show if anybody listening wants to check them out. But thank you both again, and thank you all for spending a few minutes with us today. Please feel free to leave us 5 stars on Apple Podcast and Spotify, and we'll talk to you next time. See ya.